Please don't hurt me. It's true, baby. Please don't you
feel no sense of responsibility for the death of the Willis children.
No apologies here. With his probation officially over since midnight, former Governor George Ryan has a mouthful to say about his corruption sentence and what is next. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Kate Sullivan. Rob is on assignment. Tonight, a defiant and somewhat detached George Ryan takes us inside his thoughts on his conviction and his political life and what is next. He shared them with Chief Correspondent Jay Levine.
I paid the price. I did it, kept my mouth shut, and it's over. I'm looking to the future now.
Prison hasn't changed George Ryan. He is still the same downstate pharmacist turned politician, pulling no punches when he talks about his conviction or others.
Anything you think you could have done differently that would have changed the outcome?
I'm not sure that there's anything I'd really wanted to have changed. But I don't know of any real major changes I'd have done in anything I did in the nearly 40 years I was in public office.
So you've not really come to grips with the fact that you were found guilty?
Yeah, sure. I've come to grips with the fact that I was convicted and sent there, but that doesn't mean it was right.
As there were, he believes, with his successor, Rod Blagojevich, who also followed him to prison.
I'm not sure that Rod Blagojevich ever wanted to govern, frankly.
Why?
Well, just be with the way he acted and what he did. But I think he got a raw deal.
How so?
14 years in prison. That was a terrible call. And I might add, I'm not a big fan of Rod Blagojevich's, but I think he got a raw deal.
George Ryan views the stalemates in the state capitol and Washington and says it's not like it used to be.
Everybody that's involved in government today is pretty bitter about something. I'm not sure what. Nobody gets along, or they can't sit down and work things out like they should. No reason for that, other than it's just too political. It's got to change.
As for the future, George Ryan plans to write a book about the characters he's known during his 4 decades in politics, travel, and continue to campaign against the death penalty. In Kankakee, I'm Jay Levine, CBS 2 News.
I will not plea bargain. I'll go to trial and establish my innocence.
When looking back on George Ryan's life, it's easy to remember him always defending himself from various scandals.
Each and every accusation is an outright damnable lie.
It started back in 1982. As a state representative, Ryan was under fire for allegedly intervening in a nursing home investigation to help an operator who did business with his pharmacy.
The accusations are just not true.
No one could have predicted all the controversy because George Ryan's earlier life seemed idyllic. Raised in Kankakee, Illinois, he and wife Laura Lynn began dating in high school. They raised 6 children. He was an Army veteran who later ran the family business, but Ryan had bigger ambitions.
I believe that I have an understanding of government. I know that I have a desire to make it work right.
He served on the Kankakee County Board before being elected to the Illinois House of Representatives, eventually serving as House Speaker.
And both Laura Lynn and I, thanks to each and every one of you again, and we'll be back to see you. Thanks very much.
That warm send-off by the Illinois House was on the day he left to become a 2-term lieutenant governor, after which Ryan successfully ran for Secretary of State.
My first goal and my first priority has been and will continue to be drug abuse prevention, mainly through education.
The scandal that would eventually send George Ryan to prison began during his time as Secretary of State. It was 1994 when a part fell off of a truck driven by a commercial truck driver. It struck a van carrying the Willis family. The ensuing inferno killed 6 children.
I must tell you that we hurt and sorrow, as you parents would for your children. The depth of pain is indescribable.
It was later learned the driver, Ricardo Guzman, obtained his driver's license illegally by paying a bribe to Secretary of State officials.
I don't blame Mr. Guzman or anybody else for it. I think it was an accident, a very tragic accident.
The far-reaching impact of that scandal was yet to be fully known when Ryan was elected governor of Illinois in 1998.
History is waiting to be made, and we intend to make it.
He made history the next year by being the first sitting governor to meet with Cuban President Fidel Castro.
We hope to usher in a new era of cooperation and understanding.
Also in 1999, Ryan and legislators created Illinois First, a multi-billion-dollar public works program to rebuild roads, schools, and transit. It was the next year in 2000 when Ryan made a decision that would become a central part of his legacy. He ordered a moratorium on the death penalty.
I'm commuting the sentence of all death row inmates, 167 of them.
He halted executions after several death row inmates were found to be wrongly convicted.
I had to add, our capital system is haunted by the demon of error.
At this time, Ryan himself was under intense scrutiny from federal prosecutors, and he decided to be a one-term governor.
I will not be a candidate for Republican nomination for governor in the year 2002.
He was charged in 2003 and then convicted in 2006 on corruption charges stemming from his Secretary of State years.
I believe this decision today is not in accordance with the kind of public service that I've provided to the people of Illinois over 40 years.
Ryan began serving a 6.5-year sentence in 2007, and until her death 4 years later, Laura Lynn Ryan begged for his release.
One day, we will be back together the way we should be and live a happy, normal life together.
That didn't happen, but George Ryan completed his sentence in July of 2014, still maintaining his innocence.
I've come to grips with the fact that I was convicted and sent there, but that doesn't mean it was right.
After his release from prison, Ryan continued to campaign against the death penalty and worked on a book about all of the people he met in politics. Again, he was 91 years old.
We have been following breaking news today. Former Governor George Ryan passed away at the age of 91.
Ryan spent 35 years in Illinois politics, rising from lieutenant governor to secretary of state. He served a single term as Illinois governor from 1999 to 2003. He broke barriers, becoming the first sitting governor in half a century to visit Cuba and dictator Fidel Castro. He also ended the state's death penalty and emptied Illinois' death row. A corruption scandal, however, cut his political career short. A jury convicted him on all charges. He served more than 5 years in prison. WGN's Christine Flores continues our coverage live from the Loop.
Showing us how people are reacting to the former governor's passing. Christine?
Ray and Micah, good evening. We spoke to close friends of George Ryan who tell us the kind of person that he was outside of politics. They also told us how they'd like the former governor to be remembered.
I'm very sad. He was a hero, did a lot of good in his life, former client, kind of part of the family. I've, been close to them for a quarter of a century.
Andrea Lyon has known former Illinois Governor George Ryan since 2003 and later joined the defense team that represented him in 2006 when he was indicted, having known him as much more than a political figure.
I just got to know him in a way where our families were around each other. My son and his son hit it off because they're both crazy fishermen. And, it's hard to explain. He's just a good human being.
Characteristics that are echoed by former Illinois House Republican leader Jim Durkin.
He was a man that didn't express any bitterness or any type of criticism for people that were involved with his case. He accepted his responsibility and he understood the consequences and he moved on with his life.
In 2006, Ryan was convicted of federal corruption charges, accused of racketeering, conspiracy, tax fraud, and making false statements to the FBI. He was then represented by attorney Dan Webb.
He was just a very dear friend. He was actually a quiet and soft-spoken person, but he had enormous insights into what problems were being faced by Illinois.
He had this incredible way about him in which he was able to find ways to bring adversaries together to get difficult issues done. And I've said that he bridged the gap between Republicans and Democrats in Springfield. Not an easy thing to do.
He stood up and he did something, and he let himself care about the common man.
The former governor grew up in Kankakee. At this time, his cause of death is not clear. For now, reporting live. We'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Christine.
Editor Mike Flannery covered George Ryan for many years, from the state capitol to prison and beyond. He is joining us now this afternoon, and listening to Paris's report just reminds you of his legacy, what he accomplished. I want to hear from you, though, Mike. When you think of George Ryan, what do you think he would and should be remembered for?
Well, you know, he had a gruff exterior, Sylvia. He could harumph with the best of them. But he, in addition to being bipartisan, he did some big and bold bipartisan things, a big public works project, multi-billion-dollar project that really helped to boost Mayor Richard M. Daley in the 90s. There were projects at the CTA and the Chicago Public Schools in Chicago, as well as in the suburbs and downstate. And it was actually the Illinois Farm Bureau pushing for years to sell soybean and corn and wheat to Cuba that prompted Ryan to become the first ever U.S. sitting governor to go meet with Fidel Castro. I went with him twice to Cuba on those trips. One of them famously involved a meeting for 2.5 hours with Fidel Castro where we ran out of videotape because Castro just wouldn't shut up. He wanted to keep talking to us. There was also that I put in mind back when he was Illinois Speaker of the House. Ryan, in a much more conservative posture back in those days, made some parliamentary rulings that made it more difficult and ultimately impossible for supporters of the Equal Rights Amendment to pass it and add it to the U.S. Constitution. The failure here in Illinois, Sylvia and Dane, was a key to the failure of the ERA nationwide.
Mike, how would you say, you knew him for many years, how did he change the most over the years? One would certainly think of his views on capital punishment, right?
Well, you know, he really, once he became governor, I think he saw that the path to doing big and bold things had to be bipartisan because there were so many Democrats in the General Assembly. He was going to have to work things out with Mayor Daley, with Speaker Madigan, with the Democrats in the state Senate. And on the death penalty, he told me that the thing that changed his heart on that issue was being governor and then having the first execution come before him. He allowed it to go forward, but he said he was haunted by all the stories and the exposés of wrongful convictions in Illinois. And that, Dane, is what ultimately prompted him to empty death row. He said one mistake was too many on death row.
Yeah, he was very forward on that, no doubt. But he was also an old school politician. And, you know, those of us who've lived and worked in Chicago for a while, if you did a story on him and he didn't necessarily agree with you, he would call. He would say, I want to speak, you know, and I know you have had that experience with him yourself. That really kind of defined, he just would come to the source.
He would. He would give me a piece of his mind. You know, Sylvia, there was, just before he left office, he had a dinner that we dubbed the Last Supper with me and a couple of other local reporters down in the governor's private dining room at the executive mansion in Springfield. And, you know, it was all off the record. And, you know, without getting into details, he let us have it and let me have it on some things he felt that I had done unfairly. But in the end, he said, you know, we need journalism. We need reporters covering the state government to make things work. And he did recognize that for all of his unhappiness about specific stories. He recognized the role we play.
Well, George Ryan.
I think you used the right word there, Mike. Gruff, but he did have a warm touch about him.
He did. All right. Thanks for joining us this afternoon and sharing your memories. We appreciate it. Always great to see you, Mike Flannery.
Yeah.
Great to see you guys, too.
We have been following breaking news today. Former Governor George Ryan passed away at the age of 91.
Ryan spent 35 years in Illinois politics, rising from lieutenant governor to secretary of state. He served a single term as Illinois governor from 1999 to 2003. He broke barriers, becoming the first sitting governor in half a century to visit Cuba and dictator Fidel Castro. He also ended the state's death penalty and emptied Illinois' death row. A corruption scandal, however, cut his political career short. A jury convicted him on all charges. He served more than 5 years in prison. WGN's Christine Flores continues our coverage live from the Loop.
Showing us how people are reacting to the former governor's passing. Christine?
Ray and Micah, good evening. We spoke to close friends of George Ryan who tell us the kind of person that he was outside of politics. They also told us how they'd like the former governor to be remembered.
I'm very sad. He was a hero, did a lot of good in his life, former client, kind of part of the family. I've, been close to them for a quarter of a century.
Andrea Lyon has known former Illinois Governor George Ryan since 2003 and later joined the defense team that represented him in 2006 when he was indicted, having known him as much more than a political figure.
I just got to know him in a way where our families were around each other. My son and his son hit it off because they're both crazy fishermen. And, it's hard to explain. He's just a good human being.
Characteristics that are echoed by former Illinois House Republican leader Jim Durkin.
He was a man that didn't express any bitterness or any type of criticism for people that were involved with his case. He accepted his responsibility and he understood the consequences and he moved on with his life.
In 2006, Ryan was convicted of federal corruption charges, accused of racketeering, conspiracy, tax fraud, and making false statements to the FBI. He was then represented by attorney Dan Webb.
He was just a very dear friend. He was actually a quiet and soft-spoken person, but he had enormous insights into what problems were being faced by Illinois.
He had this incredible way about him in which he was able to find ways to bring adversaries together to get difficult issues done. And I've said that he bridged the gap between Republicans and Democrats in Springfield. Not an easy thing to do.
He stood up and he did something, and he let himself care about the common man.
The former governor grew up in Kankakee. At this time, his cause of death is not clear. For now, reporting live. We'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Christine.
Back now to our breaking news. Former Illinois Governor George Ryan died today at the age of 91. He was convicted of corruption in 2006, including bribery, tax fraud, and money laundering. He then spent 6.5 years in prison. Joining us now is Mike Flannery, former CBS News Chicago political editor. Mike, thanks for being with us. You covered Ryan's rise from legislator from Kankakee to governor, then his fall. So I'm curious to hear on this day, as you're reflecting, if you could give us some insights into what that run was like.
Well, those crimes that you mentioned were certainly terrible, and he paid by going to prison and certainly was disgraced. But, on the day that he died earlier today after being in declining health for about 6 months. The cancer had come back. That's what, in the end, what killed him, apparently. I'm put in mind of the remarkable things that he did as governor. He passed an infrastructure program called Illinois First, multi-billion-dollar projects in the suburbs, downstate, in the city. Commuters on the Eisenhower Expressway still have him to thank for having gotten rid of the Hillside Strangler out there, that congestion point that was moved a mile or two east by the expansion of the Eisenhower there. And Marie, I'm also put in mind of his trip to Cuba. Mm-hmm. I went there twice with him. We ended up spending 2.5 hours with Fidel Castro, who wouldn't shut up. My camera guy ran out of videotape.
Wow. Major moments. And Mike, I want to talk about another one, because you can't talk about George Ryan without speaking on his role in halting executions in Illinois. This was such a strong conviction of his.
Well, it was. He had overseen an execution. It was... he described later heart-rending, as he was, of course, the last bulwark against. He could have blocked that execution, chose not to, but he never authorized another one. And after a series of exposés showed mistaken convictions, he emptied Illinois' death row. Of course, it was former Governor Pat Quinn who ended up signing the repeal of Illinois' death penalty. But Ryan was actually nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for that, and got a phone call from Nelson Mandela, he claimed.
Mike, quickly, if I can ask, you mentioned one other major headline we should think about when thinking of Ryan. What is that?
Well, you know, it was that the first thing that put him on the front page of the New York Times and the national news media was that when he was Speaker of the Illinois House, he made a series of parliamentary rulings that in effect meant that supporters needed more votes to approve the Equal Rights Amendment. It ultimately failed in the Illinois House, and it failed here in Illinois, and that was a key reason that it failed nationally. He played a pivotal role in blocking the Equal Rights Amendment.
Mike Flannery, thank you for your reflections today. We always appreciate hearing your perspective, and thanks for your time.
You bet.